It began with a sound so small, so deceptively ordinary, that anyone else might have missed it. The fragile chime of glass bells above the door of an antique shop tucked into a forgotten corner of town. But for me, it wasn't just a sound. It was an awakening, a vibration that rippled down the invisible string tying me to the past. The day had been unremarkable. Gray skies, a drizzle whispering against the windows, and the kind of cold that clings to your bones rather than your skin. Yet something had pulled me there, something quiet and insistent, as if a voice beyond memory had murmured, "Come back, now." I stepped inside, and the scent of time itself greeted me, a mixture of cedar, old paper, perfume long evaporated but never forgotten. The light fell in golden shafts through the dusty air, each particle floating like a ghost caught between moments. There were porcelain faces staring from cracked frames, books whose spines leaned on each other for comfort, and clocks that had long since stopped caring about time. And then I saw her, the woman behind the counter. Her posture carried the weariness of someone who had measured years not by seasons, but by loss. She held something small in her hands, turning it over with a care that betrayed attachment she refused to admit. The light caught the object and fractured against its gold surface, flashing in my eyes. My breath caught before my mind caught up. It was that necklace. My mother's. I recognized it not just by sight, but by the way my chest ached when I saw it. The locket, heart-shaped and delicate, bore a faint scratch near the clasp, a mark I had made myself, years ago, when I was little and curious and clumsy with my mother's treasures. She'd laughed then, saying, "It's fine, sweetheart. Everything precious should carry at least one scar. That's how we know it lived." And now, here it was, resting in the hands of a stranger who looked at it as if it were nothing. "It's just a necklace," she said when she noticed me staring. The words floated across the room and struck me like cold wind. Just a necklace. How easily people name things they don't understand. I stepped closer, every nerve in me alert. My eyes locked on the delicate glint of gold swaying between her fingers. "Where did you get that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though something deeper, something childlike and trembling, threatened to crack through. She blinked, perhaps startled by the intensity in my tone, then shrugged with a casual detachment that only deepened my unease. "Someone came by this morning," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Brought in a few pieces, old stuff, some rings, a few brooches, and this necklace. Said it wasn't worth much, but I liked the design." Her words should have settled me, but they didn't. There was something in the way she said someone, a vague shape meant to hide a truth too personal to name. Behind her, an old radio whispered a melody, some forgotten jazz tune warped by static, filling the silence between our breaths. I looked around and caught sight of a man standing near the back of the store, half in shadow. He was thin, tall, dressed in a coat that had seen better days. He seemed to be pretending to browse, but his attention lingered just long enough to be noticed. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. His stare wasn't hostile, it was knowing. Then, as if realizing he'd been caught in the act of remembering something he shouldn't, he turned his back to me. The woman placed the necklace on the counter, sliding it across the glass like a casual offering. "You want it?" she asked. My hand hovered over it, but didn't touch. The metal gleamed softly under the dim light, carrying a pulse of its own. I felt absurd, standing there in a dusty shop, acting as though the world might collapse if I didn't reclaim that one piece of gold. And yet, wasn't that what grief was? A collection of small absurdities, each one pretending to make sense? "I do," I whispered finally. "How much?" She named a price that felt almost insulting, too little for something so priceless. I paid without question, my fingers trembling as I reached for my wallet. As she wrapped the necklace in soft tissue paper, I saw the old man move again, closer this time. He glanced at the parcel, then at me, his expression unreadable. A scar ran down his left cheek, pale and uneven, the kind of mark that looked like it came from fire or glass. Something about it tugged at a half-memory I couldn't place. When I looked again, he was gone. The chime above the door rang once, and the shop seemed to exhale with him. The woman handed me the package and smiled faintly, but it wasn't warmth, it was relief. Funny thing, she said softly. The man who sold it said it used to belong to a woman named Evelyn. My world tilted. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years, not like that, tenderly, as if the speaker had once known her voice. Evelyn? I repeated, but it came out more like a breath than a word. She nodded, oblivious to the storm that name had just unleashed inside me. My mother. Evelyn. The woman who had given everything and lost almost as much. I took the package, murmured a thank you, and walked out into the damp afternoon. The sky had darkened, the rain now falling steady and fine, soaking the pavement in rippling silver. I stood under the awning, staring at the small parcel in my hand, afraid to open it, afraid not to. When I finally did, the sight of the necklace nearly undid me. The gold looked duller now, older, as if time had breathed its dust into the cracks. The locket was still warm, though I couldn't explain why. I opened it carefully, expecting emptiness, but inside was a tiny photo. My mother's face, younger, radiant, smiling in the way she only did when she thought no one was watching, and on the opposite side, a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark hair, soft eyes. Beneath the photo, faint but legible, was a single initial, M. I felt the world narrow to that letter. My mother had never spoken of anyone with that name. My father had died when I was a child, or at least that's what I'd been told. 1,000 questions flooded my head, but none found a voice. I stood there, clutching that locket as if it could breathe. The following hours blurred into a strange sort of daze. I walked without purpose, the necklace clutched in my palm, the rain turning my reflection on shop windows into ghosts of other times. I thought of my mother's funeral, the way her friends had spoken of her with admiration and mystery, as though she had lived many lives I was never meant to see. I remembered the sealed box she'd kept under her bed, the one she'd forbidden me to open. I thought of the night I'd lost the necklace, how furious she'd been, how her anger had quickly turned to sorrow, as if she knew that losing it meant more than I could understand. Now, it had found its way back to me. Or perhaps, I thought, someone had wanted me to find it. That night, I placed it on my bedside table, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the old man's scar, the woman's trembling hands, and my mother's name whispered in that shop like a secret slipping through time. I turned on the lamp and picked it up again, tracing the engraving on the back with my thumb. The letters were faint, but unmistakable. To Evelyn. All my love, M. My chest tightened. A phrase like that doesn't belong to strangers. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills, long and distant, like a memory clearing its throat. I sat by the window, staring into the storm, the reflection of the locket shimmering faintly in the glass. Somewhere out there, someone had known my mother, someone who still remembered her name, and I was going to find out who. Because objects don't come back on their own. Someone had sent it to me, and whoever they were still out there. Tell me something. If a piece of your past suddenly reappeared, carrying the name of someone you loved and lost, would you chase it? Or would you let the ghosts rest where they lie? Leave a comment. I want to know if you'd have done what I did next. Because this was just the beginning. The next morning arrived shrouded in the color of hesitation. That pale, uncertain light before dawn when everything looks both new and ancient at once. I hadn't really slept. The necklace lay on my nightstand, catching faint glimmers of streetlight that slipped through the blinds. It almost seemed to pulse, like it remembered me, or maybe it remembered her. The thought wouldn't leave my head. I sat up, rubbed my temples, and tried to make sense of what had happened. A random antique shop, a woman I'd never met, and a stranger who somehow knew my mother's name. Coincidence had stopped feeling like a reasonable answer the moment I saw that engraved letter, M. Whoever that was, they had once loved my mother enough to mark her name in gold. And now, decades later, that memory had walked right back into my life. I decided to go back to the antique shop. When something calls you that persistently, you don't ignore it. You follow it, even if you're not ready for the truth waiting on the other side. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled like it. The air was clean, sharp, almost electric. The shop was quieter that morning, its window fogged from the chill outside. Inside, the same bell rang as I opened the door, but this time the sound felt heavier, more like a warning than a greeting. The woman behind the counter looked up, surprised to see me so soon. "Back already?" she asked, her smile uneasy. "Couldn't stay away," I said, forcing a half-smile of my own. My eyes flicked instinctively to the back of the store, where the old man had stood the day before, but he wasn't there. "The man who sold the necklace," I said carefully. "Do you remember what he looked like?" She frowned, as if reaching through fog. "He was older, quiet, had a scar right here." She traced her cheek exactly where I'd seen his. My pulse quickened. "Did he give you a name?" I asked. "No," she said. "But when he left, he dropped this." She turned, rummaged through a drawer, and handed me a folded piece of paper, its edges yellowed and soft. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. It was a photograph of my mother. She was standing in front of a small cottage, sunlight spilling across her hair, and next to her, the same man from the locket. He looked younger in the picture, but the eyes were unmistakable. The scar wasn't there yet. My throat tightened as I read the words scrawled on the back. "Summer, 1978. Evelyn and me." The handwriting was steady but familiar. My hands shook so violently I nearly tore the photo. I knew that handwriting. It was the same as the note my mother had left for me when I turned 18, the one she'd slipped into the pocket of her old sweater, the one signed with a single initial, M. "Where did you get this?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. The woman flinched. "I told you, he dropped it. I didn't think it mattered." I turned the photo over again, staring at the faces frozen in that impossible sunlight. The world tilted, the floor beneath me no longer solid. "Did he say anything else?" I asked. She hesitated, biting her lip. "Just one thing. When I asked if the necklace had a story, he said, 'It'll find its way home when it's time.'" Home. The word echoed through me. I left the shop without another word, clutching the photograph like a map that would eventually make sense. The wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the sidewalk as I walked. I didn't have a destination, only a direction, forward. My mother had always spoken of a small town by the coast, a place where she'd once lived before I was born. I'd never been there. She'd described it in fragments: the smell of salt, the sound of gulls, a white cottage surrounded by lavender, the same cottage in the photo. By the time I reached the train station, my decision was already made. The ticket agent gave me a curious look when I asked for a one-way ticket to Blackridge Bay, but I didn't care. The train pulled away from the city, carrying me through the veins of the countryside. Fields blurred into forests, forests into cliffs that dropped into gray water. All the while, I kept my hand over my pocket, feeling the necklace's small, insistent weight. I must have opened that locket 100 times during the journey, memorizing my mother's smile, trying to decode the softness in the eyes of the man beside her. There was love there, yes, but also something else, a kind of promise, or a debt. When the train stopped, the station was almost deserted. Blackridge Bay was smaller than I'd imagined, a handful of streets clinging to the coastline, with boats rocking idly in the harbor. The air was thick with sea salt and the cry of gulls. I followed a narrow path toward the cliffs, my boots sinking into the damp earth, and then, just as the photograph had promised, I saw it. The cottage. White walls faded to cream, a roof patched with moss, and a small garden overrun with wild lavender that danced in the wind. It felt wrong to knock, but I did anyway. No answer. I tried again. The door creaked open under my hand. Inside, the air smelled like old books and rainwater. The living room was small but neat, as if someone had been keeping it alive, even in absence. On the mantel above the fireplace, a collection of framed photographs stood like sentinels. My breath caught as I stepped closer. There she was again, my mother in various stages of her life, smiling beside the same man, the one with the scar. Only in these photos the scar was fresh, pale, healing. And then I saw another picture, one that made my knees weaken. It was of me, a toddler, sitting on the man's shoulders, laughing, my small hands gripping his hair. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, my entire life tilted on its axis. My father hadn't died when I was a child. He'd disappeared. And my mother, she had never told me the truth. A noise snapped me back, the sound of a floorboard creaking upstairs. I froze. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned toward the staircase just as a shadow moved at the top. The air tightened, the room suddenly smaller. And then he appeared. Older now, the scar deeper, the eyes dimmed by time but unmistakable. The man from the photograph, from the locket, from the shop. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside seemed to stop breathing. "You shouldn't be here," he said finally, his voice low but not unkind. I took a step forward, trembling. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew. His eyes softened, and a sad smile touched his lips. "You already know." The room seemed to collapse inward, every memory rearranging itself into something new, something truer. "You were supposed to be dead," I whispered. "That's what she told me." He nodded slowly. "I was supposed to be. For her safety. For yours." He walked down the stairs with a limp, each step deliberate. "Your mother and I, we made choices that couldn't be undone, choices that cost us everything." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where he'd been, why he'd left, why the lies. But before I could speak, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope, its seal unbroken, aged to yellow. "She wanted you to have this," he said, holding it out. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. My throat burned as I tore it open. Inside was a letter. The words blurred as I read, tears making the ink run. "If you're reading this, it means the truth has found you. I couldn't tell you while I was alive, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to grow free of the past that haunted us. The man you've met, his name is Michael. He was your father's closest friend, and mine too once. When everything went wrong, he took my place to protect us both. He bears the scar of my mistakes. Forgive him, and forgive me. Some truths are too heavy to carry until we're strong enough to bear them." My hands shook as I looked up at him. "Michael?" I said. He nodded once, the pain in his eyes undeniable. "Your mother saved my life," he said, "and I owed her mine. She made me promise to keep you safe, no matter what it cost." His voice broke slightly. I tried to stay away, but when I saw what had become of her things, when I saw that necklace in the box, I knew I couldn't let it vanish into nothing. I had to make sure it found you. The truth fell over me like rain, cold, cleansing, inevitable. For years I had carried her memory as if it were sealed in amber, perfect and distant. But now, I saw her not as the saint I had made her, but as a woman, flawed, frightened, brave enough to love beyond reason. I sat down, my legs unsteady, the letter trembling in my hands. "Why now?" I asked. "Why after all this time?" He looked out the window, the sea light reflecting in his eyes. "Because some stories don't end. They wait." The necklace glimmered faintly against my chest, catching the light just as it had in her hands so long ago. And for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt chosen. The truth hadn't come to break me. It had come to return me to myself. If you've come this far with me, if you've walked through the rain of memory, felt the pull of names spoken by strangers, and carried the tremble of an object that shouldn't have returned, take a breath, because this is where the story begins to breathe again. Before I go on, if you've ever lost someone who still seems to speak to you in ways the living can't, subscribe. You'll understand what it means to keep listening when the world has gone quiet. Morning in Blackridge Bay was always different from anywhere else I'd been. The light didn't just arrive. It unfolded, like a secret letting itself be told. It spread across the sea in slow ribbons of gold, catching the spray that rose from the cliffs, painting the rocks in amber. I woke early that day, not from rest, but from the kind of half-sleep that feels like remembering. The sound of the waves was the same rhythm my mother used to hum when she thought I was asleep. For the first time, I didn't cry at the memory. I just listened. Michael was already awake, sitting at the small wooden table near the window. Steam curled from his cup of tea, but he wasn't drinking it. He was staring outside, lost in the same world I was still trying to enter. The sunlight caught the edges of his scar, softening it. "You look like her in the mornings," he said without turning. His voice was calm, almost reverent. I sat down across from him, the necklace resting against my collarbone. "And you," I said. Look like a man still living in a story he hasn't finished telling. He smiled. A real one this time. Small, but alive. Maybe that's true, he said. But it's a story I didn't think anyone would want to hear anymore. The hours that followed were filled with words. Not fast, not forced, but patient. Careful, the way you peel away old wallpaper to find what's underneath. I asked him about my father, about the fire, about the years that followed. He told me about nights spent hiding under names that weren't his, about letters that never reached their destination, about promises my mother made and broke for love and fear in equal measure. Each truth was heavy, but not sharp anymore, more like stones laid into the foundation of something that could finally stand. He said she never stopped writing to me. She thought you'd find her words someday, he told me, sliding another stack of envelopes across the table. Some were dated before I was born, others after she'd fled. Her handwriting shifted over the years, the confident lines of youth turning into careful, trembling loops. I held them like relics, afraid to break the seal on something so sacred. She believed things had a way of returning, he said. People, memories, love, all of it finds its way back. Outside, the gulls cried over the surf, their echoes stretching long into the horizon. I walked out to the garden, the same one from the photograph. Lavender spilled across the path in waves of violet, buzzing with bees. The air carried her scent, jasmine and salt. I stood there for a long time, letting the wind brush against my face like a touch I'd been missing since childhood. Michael came to stand beside me. She planted those, he said. Every spring. She said lavender was the only flower that forgave neglect. I smiled faintly. Then it's fitting, I said. She must have known I'd come back someday. He nodded, but there was something else in his eyes, something unspoken. When I asked what it was, he looked toward the sea and said quietly, "There's something you haven't seen yet." He motioned for me to follow him around the side of the house, where a small shed sat half hidden under ivy. The door creaked open to reveal boxes, dust, and time itself piled in corners. He reached for a weathered trunk and lifted the lid. Inside were reels of film, dozens of them, labeled in fading ink. Evelyn, 1980, E&M, Winter, The Bay, Home. Your mother filmed everything, he said. She thought if she captured enough of life, she'd never really lose it. He handed me one reel, smaller than the rest, its label almost rubbed away. This one, he said. She made for you. The projector was still in the house. That evening, as the sky dimmed to violet, we set it up in the living room. The wall flickered to life with the soft hum of the reel spinning. The film was silent, but it didn't need words. It showed her, my mother, standing on the beach, barefoot, laughing as the tide chased her ankles. She turned toward the camera, wind in her hair, her smile so bright it hurt to look at. And then she lifted me, a baby, into her arms, kissed my forehead, and mouthed something I couldn't hear. Michael paused the reel, rewound, and let it play again slowly. You'll find your way back. That's what her lips said, over and over, like a prayer. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the machine. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the salt touch my lips. She knew, I whispered. She knew this would happen. Michael nodded. She always believed in circles. She said everything we lose comes back to us when we're ready to face it. We watched the rest of the reel in silence. When it ended, the room felt different. Not empty, but full of something invisible and alive. The ghosts weren't gone. They had just changed shape. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the tide move under the moon. The necklace rested in my palm, its surface warm. I turned it over again and again, tracing the engraved letters. To Evelyn, all my love, M. Only now I understood them differently. The M wasn't just Michael. It was memory, meaning, maybe even mercy. I realized that every part of this story, the loss, the lies, the rediscovery, wasn't about punishment. It was about permission to let go and still remember. At some point, I must have drifted into a kind of waking dream. I saw her, not as she'd been in the photographs, but older, softer, whole. She stood by the lavender garden, smiling. When I tried to walk toward her, she shook her head gently, her eyes full of peace. You don't have to come back anymore, she said. You're already home. When morning came, the sea was calm again. Michael made breakfast, humming under his breath. I told him about the dream. He didn't laugh or question it. He just nodded, as though he'd seen her too. After we ate, he said, "You should take the letters. Read them when you're ready. She'd want that." I packed them carefully, along with the photograph and the necklace. "What about you?" I asked. He looked toward the sea again. "I think my part in this story is ending," he said softly. "But yours? Yours is just beginning." Before I left, we stood on the porch together, looking out at the endless horizon. The sky was clear, the air crisp with the promise of change. "She'd be proud of you," he said. I wanted to answer, but words felt too small. Instead, I reached for his hand, the same hand that had carried her secrets, her pain, and now, her forgiveness. "Thank you," I said, "for bringing her back to me." He smiled, that same faint, tired smile I'd come to recognize, the one that carried decades of silence. "No," he said, "you brought her back yourself. I just opened the door." The train ride home felt different from the one that brought me there. The world outside the window wasn't the same gray blur. It was alive again. Every town, every face, every shadow seemed part of something greater. When I reached into my coat pocket and touched the locket, it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like it belonged where it was. I opened it once more and whispered, "I found my way back, Mom." And for the first time in years, I didn't need an answer. Stories like this don't end with finality. They dissolve into life, leaving echoes instead of closures. When I think back to that day in the antique shop, to the sound of glass bells above the door and the way the air shimmered with dust and fate, I understand now that it wasn't luck or coincidence that led me there. It was her. It was love, patient and persistent, choosing the moment I was finally ready to see. So if you've ever held something small, a photograph, a scent, a melody, and felt it pull you somewhere you can't explain, don't fight it. Follow it. Maybe it's not just nostalgia. Maybe it's someone calling you home, because what she said was wrong and right, all at once. It wasn't just a necklace. It was a promise. And promises always find their way back. The train rattled softly as it carried me home, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I was bringing it with me, not in the heavy, suffocating way of grief, but in the quiet, sustaining way of memory finally set free. Outside, the field stretched in muted colors under the fading light. I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the sky change from gold to violet to blue-black, the same colors that had once framed my mother's laughter in those old reels of film. I thought about the way she had looked into the camera, that unguarded joy on her face, the silent words she'd spoken, "You'll find your way back." And I had. When I stepped off the train and walked through the familiar streets of the city, everything looked different. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The air carried the same chill, the same smell of rain on concrete, yet somehow it felt alive again. I stopped by the little park where I used to sit as a child with my mother on Sunday afternoons. The bench was still there, worn smooth by time, its paint faded to silver. I sat down, letting the city hum around me, and reached for the necklace. The locket glowed faintly in the light from the street lamps, its edges warm against my skin. I opened it one last time. Her picture smiled back at me, calm and radiant. But this time, I didn't feel the ache of absence. I felt gratitude. Every lie, every silence, every act of love disguised as fear. I understood them now. Parents carry more than just the weight of their own lives. They carry the invisible futures of their children, and sometimes, protecting that future means disappearing into the shadows. My mother had done exactly that. She had given me not perfection, but the freedom to grow without the ghosts that haunted her. And now that I finally knew the truth, I could see her not as a mystery, but as a person, flawed, brave, heartbreakingly human. I looked up at the stars, the city lights dimming them but not erasing them. It struck me then how similar they were to memory, always there, even when you can't see them clearly. I closed the locket, kissed it once, and whispered, "Thank you, not for the pain, not for the secrets, but for the love that endured through them." Days turned into weeks, and I found myself writing again, something I hadn't done since before she passed. Not fiction, not confession, but stories that breathed. Stories about the small miracles hidden in ordinary things. A photograph that won't burn, a melody that refuses to fade, a necklace that finds its way home. I began to understand that telling these stories wasn't about escaping the past. It was about giving it voice. Every sentence felt like stitching something back together, thread by thread. I visited Blackridge Bay once more in the spring. The lavender had returned, wild and unruly, just the way she'd left it. The cottage was quiet now. Michael had passed a few months after my first visit. He'd written me a letter before he went, short but beautiful. "Don't mourn me. I've seen the ocean, and I've seen forgiveness. They look the same from where I stand. Keep her story alive." That's all either of us ever wanted. I scattered his ashes by the cliffs, the sea swallowing them gently, and I swear I heard his voice in the wind, faint, steady, free. After that, I walked down to the shore and stood where my mother had once stood, the tide curling around my ankles, the same endless rhythm playing its eternal song. I unclasped the necklace and held it out to the wind. For a moment, I almost let it go. Almost released it to the waves, to the past, to the mystery that had finally come full circle. But I didn't. Instead, I pressed it to my heart and said, "Not yet," because the story wasn't finished. It never really is. It continues in the telling, in the remembering, in every person who carries something small and calls it just a keepsake, not knowing that within it lies an entire life. When I left the bay for the last time, the air was full of light. The path back to the station shimmered under the sun, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't walking away from the past. I was walking with it. The ghosts were no longer haunting. They were guiding, and the fear that had shadowed me for so long had transformed into something gentler, acceptance. That's the thing about closure. It doesn't always come in thunder or revelation. Sometimes it arrives in quiet moments, like a letter you were never meant to find, or a voice that says goodbye without words. It's the realization that some love stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to evolve. And if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that objects, the small, seemingly meaningless pieces of our lives, are often the vessels of eternity. A necklace, a photograph, a note written in fading ink. They outlast us not because they're made of metal or paper, but because they carry the echo of touch, of intent, of love. When my mother said, "It's just a necklace," maybe she was right. To her, it was only a thing. But to me, it became the map back to everything I'd forgotten about her, about myself, about what it means to forgive. And so, I wear it still. Not as a relic, but as a reminder that the past is not a chain, but a circle. That every ending we fear is just a beginning we haven't recognized yet. That love, even when buried under years of silence, will always find a way to speak again. Now, as I sit here finishing this story, I can almost hear that chime again, the glass bells over the antique shop door, ringing softly in the distance. It's strange how it feels like both a beginning and an ending. Maybe it's both. Maybe that's the point. So, to whoever finds something one day, a ring, a locket, a note, a whisper of a name, and feels a tremor in their chest they can't explain, don't ignore it. It's not just coincidence. It's memory calling you home. Follow it. Trust it. Because sometimes, what seems like chance is really love refusing to be forgotten. And if this story has found you, maybe that love has reached you too. If you felt something in your chest while listening, if a face or a memory came quietly to mind, like this video, and subscribe. Because stories like this don't end when the words stop. They live on in those who remember. And now, as the last light fades from the bay, I know one thing with absolute certainty. She was wrong. It was never just a necklace. It was her heart. And now, it's mine.